We're now starting with our session called The Business of Taste. The moderator for this session is Mr. Romil Ratra, Executive Director and CEO at Graviss Hospitality. Joining him as speakers are Ms. Gauri Devidayal, co-founder, Food Matters Group, Mr. Gustavo H., the Hostos, CEO and founder, Forsite Creative, Mr. Rohit Sachdev, founder and CEO, SOHO Hospitality, and Mr. Thomas Andrew, Director, Food and Beverage, India and Southwest Asia at Hyatt. Over to you, please.
Okay, good afternoon. So I think something to think about when you walk into a hotel, mixed-use development, buying a luxury residence, even are you buying a room? Are you buying square footage? Or are you really buying the experience? And I think because increasingly what we see is the experience is not shaped by architecture alone, but what's on the plate, what's in the glass, and what happens around the table. So F&B today for me sits at a very interesting intersection. It's part art, it's part science, part real estate strategy, and often unfortunately part illusion. I'm sure everyone here will attest to that. But I think it has the power to create outsized value, driving footfalls, pricing premiums, brand perception. On the flip side, of course, it also has the ability to quietly destroy value when the math sometimes just doesn't work. So I think the real question that we're here to explore for all of you today is F&B truly a value creator? Or specifically from a hotel standpoint, has it just become an expensive necessity? And what's more important, what separates projects where F&B works from the many where it doesn't work? And I think to unpack that, we have a fantastic panel. I'm going to give them one quick question. I want you guys to answer this really fast. First thing that comes to your mind. Okay? You have chances to explain the longer answers later. Is F&B genuinely creating asset value today, or are we just getting better at the narrative and packaging the story? Rohit?
I think we have clear examples of where F&B is driving yield to the balance sheet. I think owners are starting to see some of their other owners doing really well, and they want to have the same impact within their hotels. I think there's a lot of intangibilities when you're able to drive value from F&B. You can increase the total revenue per room. You're bringing that element of experience, which is what everybody is talking about today. We want lifestyle, we want experience. The F&B is that intangible factor that could bring that experience elements and the experiential programming into our predominantly rooms business. And it allows you to diversify the revenue pool from just coming from rooms into other elements. So I think it's a diversification strategy. I think it's not easy to implement, but when done right, it can really drive yield.
Thomas? Yeah, I think for me, food and beverage is really the engine of the hotel. It's really the demand driver, and this is really what brings the value to the asset, because it's where you connect with the local community, and you really widen the funnel of guests and people they're gonna join you for various occasions. So I think for me, F&B is the demand driver of the hotel.
As a restaurateur, yes, I do think F&B drives asset value. But I think also, as someone who travels, if everything can be great about a hotel, from the room to the, every sort of the hospitality, all of it, and if the food doesn't hold up, that's a big no-no for me. So, I'm not talking from a P&L perspective, but from an experience perspective, it is critical today that food is given as much, F&B is given as much importance as any other aspect of a hotel. And I think today people are traveling for food and then deciding where to stay. So it's definitely a driving force.
I would probably say from an intrinsic value perspective, the easy answer is yes. From an asset value, P&L, balance sheet, it can, but I think it often doesn't. And I think that's maybe something we need to talk about today. And I think I always like to say The rooms will fill your hotel, the F&B will activate it. And unfortunately, we often package it very well, as you said, and we, I would say, design more the optics rather than the performance.
Okay, so I think everyone had interesting things, but I'm going to come back to you for a second, Gustavo, and have you guys have worked on like 300 plus projects globally. What's the biggest disconnect between how F&B is designed on paper and how it actually performs?
I would say the main denominator we see in the way that the process goes wrong is probably, we'd have to define what on paper means, but I would say a lot of concepts are very simply conceptualized and strategized and not really developed. And I think, number one, there's tremendous amount of coordination and planning that has to go through to make a proper F&B successful. And I do know, and I do agree with you, a lot of them do feel like an expense to the owners and to the assets. It is more complex to have successful F&B than to have successful room products. I would definitely agree. But it is not rocket science. There is a science to it. There is a science to it, and people just don't follow the easy steps. So I would say that's number one. It's that sort of coordination. And it's the planning and execution eventually. And we'll get into that. It's very easy to mess up how something is planned, and even easier to mess it up how something is actually executed eventually.
Fair. So I think I'm going to come to you for a second, Thomas, for you to continue on that. You operate in a large hotel ecosystem. Where does F&B really create value in that hotel ecosystem? Is it revenue? Is it brand perception? Is it guest acquisition? Or is it something else that we're missing?
No, I think it's definitely, and the revenue is going to be the outcome. Yeah, it is the brand perception. Yeah, it is, how we distinctively, position our venues, and it's definitely guest acquisitions, because if you have a good F&B in a hotel, in an ecosystem where we have well-positioned concepts, you will acquire more guests, and which is the first touch point for a lot of the local market, again, coming back, because we're building restaurants for the local community. We don't build restaurants just, to be a service to the hotel. And therefore, it really drives, the demand, and, it amplifies, because guests will come to you to dine, they come to your bar, and, a restaurant is really the first touch point for most of people coming to a hotel. That's long before they even book a room later. So I think, all 3 points are definitely taken care of, but, revenue is definitely the outcome, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. I think, Gauri, you built some fantastically well-respected restaurants. Does great F&B reliably translate into great financial performance?
Well, you're talking to an ex-accountant, so if it wasn't, we would have shut shop long ago. Yeah, I think, of course, but you have to do it right. There are some basic fundamentals. Today, a lot of people are focused on scale and not on the bottom line, and to me, that's a big no-no. You have to get, you have to get your unit economics right, and you have to focus on what it takes to bring efficiencies there before you start looking at scale. But of course, it can be, of course, it can be profitable. And I think that if you get the product right, the brand equity that you can build and then sort of scale is immense. So, it may take a while before you start seeing profitability, but it's not a short-term return. It's not a short-term investment. So, you have to be prepared to be in it for the sort of long game and be efficient, and you will be profitable.
Okay. Rohit, you sit on both sides. You own a hotel, you build brands, you operate brands, and you advise developers and hotels. Where do you see the biggest misalignment between owners and operators coming in today?
To answer that question, you need to look at evolution. The first phase of the evolution was everyone dining in hotels. The second phase of the evolution was the independents rising and people now feeling confident that they can dine outside of hotels. The third evolution is the hotel operators picking up the pieces, rejuvenating their F&B teams, and trying to catch up and trying to create these sort of independent-looking restaurants within their hotels. And they've been trying to come up with new concepts, lease, franchise, and so on and so forth. I think the biggest misalignment is I think that a lot of owners are now being asked to reinvest, maybe renovate, and to do that in today's competitive market, there's no margin for error in terms of cutting corners. You need to invest the right amount of dollars. You need to bring the right amount of consultants, and it's you're going to have to ask these owners to invest in the capex, and it's usually been plug and play in terms of rooms and plug and pray when it comes to F&B. So I think that it's about building the owners, building the trust between the operator and the owner to make that investment, knowing that you can't squeeze blood out of a stone, but with the right hotel in the right environment where you can capture, the customers out of the surrounding captive market as well as the in-house guests to increase the total revenue per room. If done right, without cutting those corners and having all those variables accounted for, I believe that there's a lot of opportunity for owners and operators to work together to make it right.
Okay, fair enough. Something for all of you. Who creates more value today? The concept, the operator, or the real estate? Anyone?
I'm not going to say who creates more value, but I would like to say that I believe a great operator can fix a weak concept in a mediocre location, and the other way around, it would never work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think everything has to work in sync. But if I had to put a hierarchy to it, I think it's operator, concept, and real estate, because you could now potentially look at a great restaurant being in a completely random location, and it could still do well. So I think operator and product is key.
I think the concept is the hardware and the operator is the software. And I think both have to work hand in hand. A lot of complexities. There's also the whole notion of marketing in between that. So hardware and software working together.
So before I come to you, Thomas, are you saying that old adage of location, location, location doesn't hold good anymore?
No, the location is I've lost money putting the right concept in the wrong location. So I think that instinct it's instinct. That part is instinct. You got to know what concept is right for that place. Part of it is science, but a lot of it is art to really know that instinct that it's going to work.
What's your take, Thomas?
Yeah, no, I think real estate is definitely, it's the stage, no? And then we as operator are really just, bringing everything to life, yeah. But, exactly as you said, it all works together, but it ends up, with the operator really driving the business, and really being consistent and passionate about, moving forward.
Sorry, you wanted to say something, Gustavo. You picked up your mic and...
No, I was just going to second and concur, but go ahead.
All right, fair enough. So let's sort of move on to something a little more interesting. When you master plan F&B, Gustavo specifically for a project, what are the top 2 things that you typically find get compromised during execution?
Top 2.
I mean, you could go 3 if you like. There's no problem.
I think it's, to simplify it, I would say designing the operation and the performance, and then the operational and performance design. These would be the top 2 things that typically, I think, matter the most. To talk a little bit about the first, I think it's understanding how do we not overspec. Do we have too many restaurants? Are the restaurants too large? Are there too many kitchens? Are we having a lot of excessive space that is not going to be utilized, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we sort of create a business model by design rather than by passion, by inspiration, by optics? And the second one, I think all of us here will agree, is a lot is conceptualized without it having the backbone and the required performance and output that is important. So I would say master planning, whether it is multiple restaurants, mixed-use developments, hotels, or one specific restaurant, always think, how can I, by design, ace the performance and operations, and how can I make sure that I also have the operational design required?
Thomas, I'm going to come to you. How do you decide between building an in-house concept versus partnering with someone externally or bringing in an external brand in a hotel?
So, of course, for Hyatt, we pride ourselves on being a F&B driven company. Really, been doing that successful over years and years and years. And I think for us, it's very important when I think about doing it in-house is that we have the ability to be more flexible, that we have the ability to really be in-ground in the local space and environment we work, and have the ability to also evolve where need be. Of course, there's opportunities, and there's locations, and I think it's very important that a partnership between a celebrity chef or a big famous brand is that you have the right location and it really works with the brand and the location we're working in, and this works. This also can work. But I think for us it's very important that we are continuing to be F&B driven, to be passionate about it, and really use and leverage on the experiences we have and on that over the years to further develop and evolve our concepts and be really specific on the market we operate in, because for us this is very important that we really grounded in where we operate in.
Got that. So, Rohit, for the business that you run, you're often brought in to fix or transform F&B ecosystems. What are the most common mistakes you end up correcting?
This one frustrates me a lot. An owner has to do a restaurant. He goes, "Who's the interior designer?" And it's so siloed about getting the interior designer on board that they don't understand that F&B is a culmination of many experiential components coming together to touch the human heart. And we have a philosophy at our company called Experience by Design, where every single experiential element has been researched, planned, and executed with an excruciating amount of detail, so that there's nothing left for chance, there's nothing left for arbitration. And that involves strategy, positioning, interior design, branding, uniforms, tabletops, food and beverage, cocktail programming, music. We partner with a company in music to do music programming out of France, so that we can play the right kind of music, because it increases dwell time and revenues by up to 10%. But what do people do? Interior designer. They get the interior designer, they leave everything else to the end, then they say, what about the music? No, the general manager, he has a great playlist. We'll just plug into his phone and we'll just play some music. But when you start compromising all of those experiential elements, you're not going to touch the human heart. But when you sew a fabric through all those components, and there's alignment of how to, synergize all those components, the consumer comes in, he walks into the restaurant, he sits down, something happens, he goes, oh my God, I love this place. He tries, he buys, he shares, he likes, he recommends, he tells his friends. And then if you can combine that with amazing service, because that has to be, the underlying element of F&B is service, and you can keep repeating that over and over again, you'll eventually hit a tipping point and you'll be driving yield to the balance sheet. So it can't be, interior design is not F&B experience transformation.
Okay, Gauri, what makes you say no?
What makes me say no?
What makes you say no? Because when you run restaurants like you do, which are award-winning, in certain cases, they define what a city has to offer. I'm sure there's a line of malls, retail guys, real estate developers saying, hey, put your brand in my place. Why would you say no? And what would you say no to?
I think a big no for me is revenue share models. So, location and things, obviously, if you're talking to someone, it's because you're interested in that location, and you think that, it's got the footfall or the audience that you want to cater to. But I have a big problem with revenue share models. So I know that's sort of the large majority of how sort of it works between restaurants and real estate. But to me, that it's a big no-no, because again, going back to the original point about operational efficiencies and the P&L, one of your biggest levers is rent. And manpower today costs what it does. If you want to give great service, which is integral to the experience, you want to invest in the right kind of talent. These are things that you don't compromise on, and you want to use the best quality ingredients. Your food cost might be higher than average, and I think that's all very, very important. But when it comes to rent, there's only so much value addition I feel that a landlord is bringing, and I don't see the reason why they should benefit in the upside beyond a point. So this is probably very controversial and not going to go down well with most people sitting here, but to me that's a big no.
I mean, if you don't mind, if you go to the Middle East, there's a lot of licensing going on. And I wouldn't call it a revenue share model, but it's a model in which there's a upfront fee and a top line monthly royalty fee. And we're doing that with Marriott, and probably for the first time, Hyatt's doing it with us. But those models are working in selective markets. In the Middle East, it's quite popular as well. And when you get the right type of relationship, like we have in Dubai with Marriott, it really works well, where the franchisor is us, the franchisee is the developer, and the operator is the hotel operator.
So,
sorry, just to clarify, I was talking about us, operating, yeah.
No, fair enough. And I think, so Gauri and Rohit, for both of you, I'm going to press on this a little more because it's interesting. And like you said, a little controversial as well. What frustrates you most about working with hotels, landlords, real estate partners, developers, and more importantly, of course, rev share we know. But what do the best partners get right?
So we've always operated as standalone properties, except one of our restaurants, which is in a commercial building. So I don't have experience of any pain points with hotel operators, but I think the most important thing is for landlords to be flexible. And by that, I mean, when a restaurant opens, as much as you can plan and, sort of design to the best of your ability, which gets better with experience, there are always things that once you start operating the space, you realize, you either need more space or this isn't working or whatever. And I think that if a landlord values having your brand in their location, to be sort of open to working with you, within the remit of feasibility, I think is really important to not have that churn of restaurants in your property, right? Because I think even for a landlord, you start, this is maybe a very Indian thing, but then they start saying that, it's jinxed, etc., right? If a space keeps changing operators. So I think that it's really important for a landlord to also think long term and not just from a rent perspective, and work with you if they value having you as a brand and you're not just a tenant for them.
Can I be the third-party mediator here?
Yes, of course.
I think it would be specifically case per case, a value talk. If you take a Dubai Mall example where the landlord is bringing the fountains, has millions of people coming over, it makes sense that they potentially take a revenue share. At that specific moment, they bring a lot of value, they're going to bring you undetermined exposure. But if you're an operator that's going to come into a mediocre, location, and you're going to bring value, then I think it doesn't make any sense that you would also benefit from this person. So I think it is a discussion of value add eventually, and I think that's why it's a case per case where you should say, yes, it makes sense, or it doesn't make sense, and have the discussion. I think Point in case, Apple never agreed in Dubai Mall to do the revenue share, and they stood strong, and eventually the value flipped, and Dubai Mall realized we need them if anywhere in our mall, and there you go.
Fair. So, since we're talking rev share, rent, etc., Gustavo, what do you think is a realistic? I mean, the reason I ask this is because you've operated and set up spaces in multiple geographies. What is a realistic rent to revenue ratio that works, but the market still resists accepting?
Am I representing the landlord or the tenant? Or?
I leave it to you. You decide.
I would probably say if you look at a P&L, you would want to sit between 8 to 12%. Market to markets, that's healthy. We've seen some crazy numbers, and you can get away with it in some markets. You don't in others. We've seen some success stories that eventually didn't agree to share, and they get away with a very small single-digit, rental agreement. I think it's very important to just make sure to understand that a healthy rent to revenue ratio is going to be good for the sustainability of the concept and the operations. And if the operators start suffering because the rentals are really aggressive, they're going to start cutting costs, they're going to start deteriorating the experience, the quality, etc. And it's actually going to be a lose-lose for both. And if we look at Dubai as a great example, and I think similar things are happening in the East, I think a message that I always try to say is, let's find that right balance or that right fee structure and mechanism that is most sustainable, because eventually that's how everybody wins.
So, this one's for you, Thomas. Can hotel F&B consistently match standalone restaurant profitability, or is that a wrong benchmark to take?
We need to talk about that separately. I think it's probably a wrong benchmark to take, because we don't pay rent usually, so that's one thing. But also I think, if in a freestanding space, and for your restaurants as well, they really serve one purpose. They have their own ecosystem. They have their own feet to stand on, and obviously, bring the money to the P&L. Whereby in a hotel, of course, we always, on the other hand, we always say that we want to operate like freestanding restaurants. Yeah. Of course, having the P&L, having the profitability, and having all of this also intact. But I think for hotels, a restaurant is a bit more than just a single restaurant. It serves a larger purpose. It works within the whole hotel ecosystem. It supports, each other. You've got various, when we have various concepts in a hotel, you look at different guest profiles, you look at different behaviors of guests. And what for us is very important as well, that our restaurants work through the day part of, from morning, you have breakfast, you have lunch, dinner, afternoon tea, and so forth. So I think we have a larger ecosystem. But from a profitability point of view, obviously we strive to make as much profit as you. But as I said, I think it would be a wrong benchmark to compare these two, because they have slightly different goals. Let's put it that way. So
I think to take off on that, Rohit, you've operated brands, you've scaled brands, you've also advised on brands. What does a sustainable F&B business model actually look like today?
What do you mean by sustainable in terms of our payback, or like,
yes.
What do you mean? Look, I've had people come to me and go, if you don't get your money back within 1 year, it's no use to get into F&B, and that's just a myth. I'm sure maybe there's outliers out there who've done that. With good restaurants, we've got one that's been operating for 14 years. It does 40-50% margins, EBITDA margins for the year. So I would say a typical restaurant, if you're doing well, and I'm looking at the median level, not outliers. There are those that can get their money back in 2 years. we've seen some crazy numbers coming out of Dubai. But I would say, but I think in general, you should look at a 3 to 5 year 5-year for the ones that are slow moving, and two is possible, 2 to 3 years for the ones that are doing really well. But the one thing that you have to understand about this business, which is why everyone says it's so tough, is there's so many variables that you need to control. There's unbelievable amounts of variability in the business, and you're either sinking or you're swimming. If you're floating, it's because you're keeping it afloat.
You said it, man. So many variables. The Straits of Hormuz closed, there's no gas. Gauri, at the high end, do awards and recognition help this business? Or do they sometimes distort it?
I don't know if they distort it, but I think obviously it helps. It's a marketing tool today. Yes, if it's completely absurd or unwarranted and it's kind of been acquired in some way, then I don't think it holds any merit. But certain awards definitely carry their weight, and it also depends on the process, etc. But it's a very legitimate marketing tool, and especially international awards. I mean, if you are in a city or a place where you have an international audience coming in, tourist footfall, etc., then I think awards are very much like the new guidebook in a way. It's a filter for people to decide where they're going to have those few meals in a city, and and it's validation that you can't hopefully buy.
The thing is, once you get on, you're on, right? So you don't want to get off. And that's the tricky part, right? You get on, you get the visibility, you get the marketability, but then you got to sustain that and not get off, because then there's other repercussions on the flip side.
So, do you think we're overbuilding F&B in India today? I know that 2 of you operate in India full time. You guys are talking to clients, potential clients. Everybody wants F&B. It's everyone's favorite child until the child throws a tantrum. Suddenly they become the bad child. But and this is not just to you guys. I'd like your take on it. But very happy to listen to anybody else in the audience as well. If you truly believe we're overbuilding F&B today.
I want to share one statistic. So the National Restaurant Association of India comes out with this food services report every year. And one very interesting statistic in the last report was that I think the average Indian, and of course, I'm not getting into tier 1, tier 2, etc., but assuming tier 1, dined out, I think it was 2 or 3 times a month, and now that's gone up to 10 times a month.
Yeah,
so
8.
Something.
Versus Hong Kong or Bangkok or New York, which are 40 plus.
Okay, so in the Indian context, I think that's a reflection of the fact that F&B is a new form of dining, of entertainment for people. And that's where, they're going out to socialize now, as opposed to going maybe to the movies or, things like that. So it's definitely...
That's probably because popcorn's more expensive than eating in one of your restaurants.
Very true. But yeah, I think, there's...